The air that night was heavy with the kind of silence that feels deliberate, as though the world itself was holding its breath. In a dimly lit house at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, a man sat alone at his table, a glass in his hand and a faint tremor in his fingers. His name was Adrian, and he had once been known for his laughter, the kind that filled rooms and drew people in. But now, that laughter had turned into something brittle, a hollow echo of the man he used to be. There was a time when Adrian trusted Daniel more than anyone else. They had grown up together, shared secrets under the stars as boys, stolen moments of mischief as teenagers, and stood by each other as men. Daniel had been his brother in all but blood, his confidant, his shield. They had talked of dreams, of ambitions, of futures that seemed unshakable. But all of that had cracked and splintered in the span of one brutal betrayal. The memory gnawed at Adrian like a parasite. The deal they had worked on together, a partnership born out of trust, had been ripped apart by Daniel's greed. What was supposed to have been their shared triumph turned into Adrian's ruin. Daniel had taken everything, their investors, their contracts, and worst of all, Adrian's reputation. Overnight, Adrian became the liar, the thief, the man no one wanted to work with. While Adrian sank, Daniel thrived. He wore expensive suits, sipped wine in glittering restaurants, and walked into every room as though he had built the world himself. For months, Adrian tried to shake off the betrayal. He tried to bury the anger, but every time he saw Daniel's name, every time he heard people speak of his success, the bitterness grew darker, heavier, until it finally turned into something sharper. Vengeance. He did not plan it in haste. Vengeance, Adrian told himself, must be precise, like a blade honed to perfection. He studied Daniel from a distance, watching his routines, his weaknesses, the places where his guard slipped. He learned that Daniel, despite his wealth, still trusted Adrian's friendship. Perhaps it was arrogance, or perhaps it was guilt disguised as denial. But Daniel reached out to Adrian occasionally, speaking as though nothing had fractured between them. To Daniel, Adrian was a harmless relic of his past, broken, beaten, powerless. That was the mistake. Adrian invited him over one evening, under the guise of reconciliation. His voice had carried the same warmth it once did, the kind that disarmed suspicion, and Daniel, without hesitation, agreed. That night, Adrian prepared everything with care. The wine was chosen deliberately, Daniel's favorite vintage, a bottle he had once praised endlessly. Adrian handled it with trembling precision, emptying just enough into a glass before lacing it with a clear liquid, one that promised silence without drama. It would not be immediate. No, Adrian wanted Daniel to feel it creeping, wanted him to taste the trust he had destroyed. When Daniel arrived, the years seemed to fold back in an instant. He wore his usual confident smile, his suit pressed and sharp, his voice rich with charm. Adrian matched him, masking his contempt with the ghost of old camaraderie. They spoke as they once had, of business, of life, of memories that seemed to belong to strangers now. And then Adrian poured the wine. Daniel lifted the glass without hesitation, eyes bright with nostalgia, as though this meeting truly meant a bridge rebuilt. He drank, savoring the taste, while Adrian watched with a steady calm. As the night stretched on, Daniel's smile began to falter. His hand, once so steady, shook slightly as he lifted his glass. His laughter grew forced, his words slurred at the edges. Adrian leaned forward, his eyes never leaving him, and spoke quietly, almost tenderly. "Trust," he said, "is the sweetest poison of all." Daniel's face twisted in confusion, then realization, but by then the strength was leaving him. He clutched at the table, eyes wide, searching Adrian's face for mercy, for explanation. Adrian gave him neither. He simply watched as Daniel's breath grew shallow, as his once commanding presence crumbled into fragility. When it was over, the house was silent again, but this silence was different. It was thick, suffocating, final. Adrian sat back, the glass still untouched before him, his heart pounding not with triumph, but with something colder. Vengeance, he realized, was not the catharsis he had imagined. It was heavy, as though he had swallowed stones. Yet as he stared at Daniel's lifeless form, he knew one truth with absolute clarity. The betrayal had been answered. The scales had been balanced, even if his soul now carried the weight of it. Outside, the night remained indifferent, the world turning on as though nothing had happened. But in that small, dimly lit house, a bond that had once been unbreakable had reached its final, poisoned end. Adrian sat in the stillness long after Daniel's body had gone cold, the weight of what he had done pressing into his chest like an immovable stone. The lamp on the table cast its soft yellow glow across Daniel's lifeless face, making the betrayal look almost peaceful, as though death had granted him the serenity he had stolen from others in life. Adrian thought of their childhood, the days of running barefoot across sunlit fields, of whispered secrets under summer skies, of unshakable loyalty sworn in hushed voices. Those memories now mocked him, like faded photographs burned at the edges. The poison had done its work, but it lingered in Adrian's mind like an echo. He replayed the moment Daniel's eyes widened in realization, that fleeting flicker of recognition, of fear, of helplessness. It should have been satisfying, but the truth was far more complex. Satisfaction was a fleeting spark. What remained was something darker, heavier. He stood, his legs unsteady, and moved to the window. Outside, the world was oblivious. Cars passed on the distant street, lives continued, laughter drifted faintly from a house across the way. No one knew that in this quiet corner of the world, a man had just rewritten the bond of friendship into a tale of vengeance and poison. Adrian felt a strange, almost surreal detachment. He was both present and far away, as though watching himself from another place entirely. The body on the table was not just Daniel. It was years of trust, of shared dreams, of brotherhood. Adrian had not only killed his betrayer, he had killed the last remnant of who he once was. He touched the glass of wine still before him, his own untouched. The bitter irony was sharp. He could not bring himself to drink it. To him, the glass was tainted, a mirror reflecting the venom in his own heart. Hours passed. Adrian did not sleep. Instead, he sat in the same chair, staring at Daniel's slackened features, waiting for the rush of regret, or perhaps the roar of triumph. Neither came. Only a steady, gnawing silence filled the room, the kind that eats away at a man's soul. By morning, the first gray light of dawn seeped through the blinds. Adrian's eyes burned from exhaustion, but his thoughts were relentless. He wondered if anyone would miss Daniel, if the world would mourn him or simply move on to the next story of wealth, charm, and power. Men like Daniel were often lionized even in death, their sins smoothed over by nostalgia and selective memory. Adrian almost laughed at the thought. Would the world remember Daniel as the brilliant, charismatic figure he projected, or would the truth ever seep through, like poison into wine? When the time came, Adrian moved with mechanical precision. He cleaned the table, gathered the evidence, and set about erasing the traces of the night. Each motion was deliberate, but his mind wandered. He thought about how Daniel had once saved him from a fight in their youth, how he had once celebrated Adrian's birthday with a sincerity that seemed unshakable, how easily such bonds had shattered, how deeply they had been corrupted by greed. By the time the sun had risen fully, Adrian had carried Daniel's body into the night's embrace, leaving behind only the faint scent of wine and bitterness in the house. The world would not know, not yet. Perhaps not ever. But Adrian knew, and that knowledge clung to him like a shadow he could never escape. In the days that followed, he moved through life like a ghost. Friends who had drifted away after his ruin still ignored him, unaware of the role Daniel had played in his destruction. They spoke of Daniel occasionally, their voices tinged with admiration. Adrian listened in silence, his face expressionless, his heart hollow. The vengeance had been carried out. The scales had been balanced. But with each passing day, Adrian realized something chilling. He was no freer than before. If anything, he was bound tighter, shackled not by Daniel's betrayal, but by the act of revenge itself. He had poisoned Daniel's body, but in the process, He had poisoned his own soul. At night, the silence of the house returned, thick and oppressive. Sometimes he thought he heard Daniel's voice, soft and mocking, reminding him that vengeance does not heal, it only scars deeper. He would wake in a cold sweat, the image of Daniel's eyes at the final moment burned into his mind. And so Adrian lived on, neither hero nor villain, but something else entirely, a man defined by betrayal, vengeance, and the lingering taste of poisoned trust.